The night was meant to be his triumph. Damien Westwood, a man who built his reputation on ruthless ambition and charm, had planned every detail. The tuxedo tailored in Milan, the glistening diamond watch, and the young model clinging to his arm, each piece was part of the performance. He wanted the world to see him not as a man who had discarded his wife, but as a king ascending to a higher throne. The gala at the Waldorf Astoria was the perfect stage. Cameras would flash, society's elite would whisper, and Damien would relish every second of it. The model at his side, Serafina Lane, was everything tabloids adored. Barely 26, a social media darling with legs that seemed endless, her sequin dress shimmered under the city lights like liquid gold. She leaned into Damien, her laughter exaggerated, her perfume heavy. To Damien she was more than a lover. She was an ornament, proof that he had traded ordinary for extraordinary. That ordinary was Isabella Grant, his ex-wife, the woman he had once promised eternity, but discarded when her quiet elegance no longer fed his ego. "Tonight, my love," Damien whispered to Serafina as they stepped from the limousine, "they'll all remember us." The entrance of the Waldorf was a storm of camera flashes. Paparazzi shouted Serafina's name, and Damien felt his chest swell with pride. But the moment he reached the velvet rope, the pride shattered. A tall security guard held up a hand. "Name, sir?" Damien smirked, accustomed to doors parting for him. "Westwood, Damien Westwood." The guard scanned the guest list on his tablet. A pause, a frown. Then the words that froze Damien's smile. "I'm sorry, Mr. Westwood, your name isn't on the list." For a moment, Damien thought it was a joke. He laughed, flashing his $1,000,000 grin. "Check again, I'm a personal donor to the foundation. I'm always on the list." The guard's expression didn't soften. "I've checked, sir. You and your guest are not admitted tonight." Around them, the crowd stirred. Paparazzi continued snapping photos, delighted at the tension. Damien's cheeks burned. Serafina clutched his arm tighter, her lips curving into an uncertain pout. "This is absurd," Damien barked, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The guard's reply was calm, almost rehearsed. "Yes, sir, that's exactly why your name was removed." The words landed like a slap. Removed. Not forgotten, not overlooked. Removed. Behind Damien, whispers rose. "Isn't that Westwood, the real estate guy? Didn't he leave his wife for that model? Looks like karma caught him." The more he demanded entry, the more the scene spiraled into humiliation. Paparazzi lenses zoomed closer, capturing every ounce of his fury, every crack in his polished facade. For a man obsessed with control, it was torture. Then, as if the night conspired against him, a new wave of flashbulbs erupted. The crowd shifted. Gasps echoed through the air. A sleek black limousine had pulled up, its tinted door opening with deliberate grace. A woman emerged. Her gown was midnight silk, flowing like water with each step. Diamonds draped her neck, catching the light as though stars themselves bowed to her presence. Her hair, once worn in simple buns and quiet braids, now cascaded in soft waves, styled to perfection. But it was her face, calm, radiant, unyielding, that silenced the street. Isabella Grant, the wife Damien had discarded, the woman he had laughed at when she wept, calling her weak, plain, and outdated. The woman he believed would never rise without him. She didn't just arrive. She commanded. Reporters shouted her name, their questions frantic. "Isabella, who are you wearing? Isabella, how does it feel to be tonight's honored guest?" Honored guest. The phrase struck Damien like a dagger. He couldn't believe it. Just months ago she had been nothing in his eyes, tucked away in their suburban home, invisible in the circles he now craved. Yet here she was, standing taller than ever, the spotlight bathing her in glory while he stood outside the ropes, denied, disgraced. Serafina shifted uncomfortably beside him, her glittering smile faltering as she realized where the cameras had turned. Not on her, not on Damien, but on Isabella. Damien tried to step forward, to push past the guard, but the man's hand pressed firmly against his chest. "Step back, sir. Only honored guests tonight." And Isabella? Isabella didn't even glance at him. She walked past as if he were nothing more than a stranger in the crowd. Her head high, her arm elegantly linked with another man's. Ethan Blackwell, the elusive billionaire whose name was spoken with reverence in every boardroom. Damien's chest tightened. Blackwell was a fortress of power, a man untouchable in finance and society, and now he was at Isabella's side, his hand protective at the small of her back. The world seemed to tilt. Damien wasn't the king tonight. He was the fool outside the castle gates. His voice cracked as he called after her. Isabella, wait! But she didn't. She paused only for the cameras, gifting them a serene smile, before gliding through the hotel doors with Ethan. Inside, music swelled, chandeliers glimmered, and applause erupted as the announcer's voice declared, "Please welcome our honored guest of the evening, Mrs. Isabella Grant." The doors closed behind her. The last sound Damien heard was the thunder of clapping hands, clapping for the woman he thought he had broken. Outside, beneath the flashing cameras, Damien Westwood realized he wasn't just denied entry to a gala. He was denied entry to the world he thought he owned, and the night was only beginning. Before the dazzling entrance at the gala, before the cameras screamed her name, Isabella Grant had been nothing more than a ghost in her own marriage. To the world, she was Mrs. Westwood, wife of Damien Westwood, the real estate mogul who clawed his way to fortune. To Damien, she was a stepping stone, someone to polish his image when he was climbing, someone to discard once he reached the heights. But Isabella hadn't always been invisible. She was once a woman with her own dreams. At 21, she had graduated top of her class in architecture. She loved designing spaces that felt alive, places that carried warmth and humanity. When she met Damien, he wasn't the millionaire he would become. He was charming, driven, and spoke to her with a tenderness that convinced her they were partners destined to conquer life together. They married quickly, swept up in what felt like destiny. Isabella gave up a prestigious job offer in Europe to follow him, believing in his promise. "Your dreams are mine too, Bella. We'll build everything together." For the first few years, she believed it. She supported his late nights, endured the constant financial pressure, and even pawned her grandmother's locket to help fund his first project. Damien often praised her sacrifices in private, telling her, "One day you'll live like a queen because of me." But when success finally came, so did the shadows. The man who used to kiss her forehead before bed started coming home later, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. He stopped asking about her drawings, her ideas, her passions. Slowly, Isabella went from being a wife to being an accessory. The dinners where she was once introduced proudly became events where she stood silently at his side, ignored while Damien entertained investors. The cruelest wound came one rainy evening. Isabella had spent the whole day preparing a quiet anniversary dinner, his favorite meal, candlelight, even the old jazz records they used to dance to. She waited, the food growing cold, her heart beating with hope. At midnight, Damien finally walked in, his tie undone, lipstick staining his collar. "Damien," she whispered, her voice trembling, "where have you been?" He didn't even flinch. He poured himself a drink, shrugged, and said words that would haunt her forever. "Stop acting like a desperate housewife, Isabella. You're boring. I need someone who excites me." That was the night she realized the man she had built her life around had already left her. Emotionally, if not legally. The final break came months later, at a charity dinner. Isabella, 6 months into trying to salvage their marriage, arrived only to see Damien at the table with Serafina Lane. The young model leaned against him as though Isabella didn't exist. When Isabella approached, Damien didn't hide, he didn't deny. He simply looked at her, cold and dismissive, and said, "Don't embarrass yourself, Bella. Go home." The words sliced through her like glass. She left that night, not just humiliated, but destroyed. Their home, once filled with her laughter, became a prison of silence. Days later, divorce papers arrived at her door. The world whispered behind her back. Poor Isabella. She wasn't enough. He traded her for someone younger, more glamorous. Invitations stopped coming. Friends faded away. Even family members looked at her with pity. She felt stripped of everything. Her husband, her place in society, her identity. For months, Isabella withdrew. She lived quietly in a small apartment, far from the glitz of Manhattan, where nobody recognized her. She cooked simple meals, walked alone through the park, and cried more nights than she could count. She would stare at the ceiling, asking herself, was I really so unworthy? Did I mean nothing? But somewhere in the ruins of her heartbreak, something hardened. A voice inside her whispered, he wanted you to vanish, prove him wrong. That was when Ethan Blackwell entered her life. Ethan had been a silent observer in their world for years, A billionaire investor, private and elusive, a man Damien desperately wanted to impress, but could never fully reach. Ethan had met Isabella only briefly at past galas, but he remembered her kindness, the way she listened when no one else did. One afternoon, as Isabella sat at a quiet cafe sketching in her notebook, Ethan appeared. He didn't come with pity. He didn't offer hollow words. He simply said, "I heard what Damien did. But I also know who you are, Isabella. Don't let his betrayal define you." At first, she resisted. She wasn't ready to trust, not after Damien. But Ethan didn't push. Instead, he offered opportunities. He connected her with architectural projects, introduced her to philanthropic circles, and encouraged her to rediscover herself. With every step, Isabella began to rebuild. She wore confidence like armor, slowly at first, then with conviction. The world that once mocked her now started to take notice. Her designs appeared in magazines, her speeches at charity events drew admiration, and her presence became magnetic. Still, she kept her transformation quiet. She knew Damien's arrogance blinded him. He thought she had faded into obscurity. He never imagined she was rising higher than he could reach. And that was what made the gala so important. It wasn't just another night of luxury, it was the night Isabella would step fully into the light. She wasn't coming to watch from the shadows. She was coming as the honored guest, her name on every headline, her grace undeniable. For Damien, it would be the ultimate humiliation. For Isabella, it would be the final proof that she had not been broken. But the journey had only just begun. Because while the gala would showcase her rebirth, it would also awaken Damien's rage. A man who built his empire on control would never accept being overshadowed, especially by the woman he had thrown away. And Isabella had no idea just how far Damien would go to claw back his power. The Waldorf Astoria had always been more than a hotel. On nights like this, it was a temple of power, a cathedral of wealth where New York's most influential gathered not just to give, but to be seen giving. The marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that dripped like frozen waterfalls. Gold-trimmed mirrors reflected gowns worth more than houses and tuxedos stitched by hand in Paris. Every corner breathed opulence, and every guest moved with the quiet arrogance of people who believed the world bent to their whims. Outside, Damien Westwood had already tasted humiliation at the Velvet Rope, but inside, the story was entirely different. For those admitted, the night was an intoxicating blur of music, champagne, and opportunity. A string quartet played a sweeping waltz as couples glided across the ballroom floor. Waiters in crisp white jackets carried silver trays of caviar, truffle canapés, and glasses of cristal. The air buzzed with the scent of designer perfume, the murmur of calculated conversations, and the clicking of camera shutters. Isabella Grant stepped in this world not as a shadow, not as an afterthought, but as the woman everyone turned to see. The announcement of her arrival had spread like wildfire through the crowd. "The honored guest is Isabella Grant," the announcer had declared, and for a moment the ballroom seemed to exhale in surprise. Heads turned, eyes widened, whispers darted across the room like sparks. "Isabella? That's Damien's ex-wife. She looks incredible. Who's that with her? Ethan Blackwell." Indeed, Isabella moved with Ethan Blackwell at her side. His presence alone commanded silence. Tall, broad-shouldered, his silver cufflinks catching the light, Ethan was the kind of man who didn't need to speak to be respected. But tonight, it was Isabella who shone brightest. Her gown, a deep midnight silk embroidered with crystals, shimmered like a constellation under the chandeliers. The diamonds around her neck, an heirloom she had once hidden away, now glittered proudly. But it wasn't the jewels or the fabric that made her unforgettable. It was the way she carried herself. No longer the wife who trailed behind a husband, Isabella walked with her chin high, her smile calm, her eyes burning with a quiet fire. The room bent around her presence. "Mrs. Grant, you honor us," said the chairwoman of the gala, rushing to greet her. "Your contribution to tonight's cause has been extraordinary." Isabella accepted the praise with grace. "It's a privilege to give back," she said, her voice steady, her tone elegant. "Tonight isn't about me. It's about the children we're here to support." The cameras loved her. Flashes burst like fireworks, each capturing her transformation, each image destined for the front pages of tomorrow's society columns. Meanwhile, outside, Damien's fury boiled. Through the glass doors he could see it all. Isabella laughing softly as Ethan bent close to speak to her. Isabella shaking hands with CEOs and dignitaries. Isabella glowing as though she were born for this stage. Serafina pouted beside him. "Why aren't we inside, Damien? Everyone's staring. This is embarrassing." Damien clenched his jaw. "It's a mistake, a clerical error. They'll regret this." But deep inside he knew. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately erased his name, and worse, someone had elevated hers. Inside, the evening unfolded like a coronation. Isabella was ushered to the head table, placed beside Ethan and across from senators, actors, and royalty. The master of ceremonies praised her philanthropy, announcing her as one of the largest benefactors of the night. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Few had known she commanded such wealth, such influence. The irony was cruel. Damien had once mocked her for doing nothing while he worked. Now, the world was celebrating her for doing everything he could not. As the speeches continued, Isabella scanned the room. She saw the same faces who had once pitied her, whispering when Damien left her for Serafina. Tonight, those same lips curved into admiration, envy, even awe. She caught Margaret Langford, a society matron who had once told her, "You'll fade without Damien." Now Margaret was clapping for her. Isabella felt a small, private smile form. Yet beneath the applause, there was a storm brewing. Damien was not the kind of man to accept humiliation quietly. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, he shoved past the guard at the entrance. Serafina squealed in protest, her stilettos nearly tripping as Damien dragged her through the crowd. Cameras swiveled immediately. A hush fell as the uninvited stormed into the temple of the elite. "Damien," someone whispered. "He wasn't supposed to be here." All eyes turned as Damien's voice cracked like a whip across the ballroom. "Isabella!" he bellowed, his face red with rage. "What are you doing here?" The room froze. Isabella, seated beside Ethan, turned her head slowly. She didn't flinch. She didn't cower. Instead, she rose with measured grace, her gown flowing like midnight tide around her. "Mr. Westwood," she said, her voice calm but sharp enough to slice the silence. "I believe you're not on the guest list." Gasps erupted. Cameras flashed wildly. Ethan rose beside her, his expression like steel, ready to shield her from whatever storm Damien was about to unleash. Damien's fists clenched at his sides, his pride bleeding in front of the very people he once sought to impress. Serafina tried to tug him back, whispering, "Stop, Damien. Everyone's watching." But Damien was beyond reason. The orchestra's music had died. The champagne glasses trembled on silver trays. The entire ballroom leaned in, desperate to witness the scandal unravel. And Isabella, standing tall in the glow of 1,000 eyes, knew this was only the beginning. Because Damien wasn't here to apologize. He was here to destroy her. The ballroom had fallen silent, the kind of silence that feels alive, tense, vibrating with anticipation. Damien Westwood stood at the center of it, his face flushed with anger, his fists trembling as though the weight of humiliation pressed against his skin. This was not the role he had scripted for himself. He had envisioned triumph. Serafina on his arm, cameras capturing their ascent, his reputation soaring higher than ever. Instead, he was the intruder. The man stopped at the door, the one stripped of dignity before his peers. And there, across from him, stood Isabella. The woman he had dismissed as fragile now looked like a goddess of vengeance. Her gown shimmered under the chandeliers, her calm demeanor only intensifying his rage. To Damien, her silence was worse than insults. It was mockery. It was power. "Isabella!" His voice thundered again, echoing across the marble walls. "You don't belong here. You don't deserve this." Gasps rippled through the audience. People exchanged glances, their whispers sharp as knives. Isabella tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "I don't belong?" she asked, her voice smooth but commanding. "Strange. The organizers thought otherwise. Perhaps you should take that up with them." Laughter, faint but undeniable, rolled through the room. Damien's face darkened. The one thing he craved more than wealth was control. Control of his image, control of his narrative, control of Isabella. And now, all of it was slipping through his fingers in front of hundreds of witnesses. Serafina tugged at his sleeve, her golden dress shimmering as she tried to pull him back. "Damien, please, not here. People are staring." He shook her off violently. "Be quiet," he snapped, his voice low but venomous. The model stumbled, her eyes wide, lips trembling as the crowd absorbed his cruelty. Some guests muttered under their breath. The cracks in Damien's charm, once hidden, now showed like broken glass under bright light. Ethan Blackwell rose from his chair, tall and composed, his very presence enough to silence a room. His voice was calm, steady, but every word carried authority. "Mr. Westwood," he said, "this is not your stage. You are not invited. If you value what remains of your reputation, I suggest you leave." Damien sneered. "And who are you to tell me where I can or cannot stand?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Someone who doesn't need to scream to be heard." The words hit Damien like a punch. He had always hated Ethan, envied his effortless power, the way people deferred to him without question. Damien had spent years clawing for recognition, while Ethan simply commanded it by existing. And now Ethan stood at Isabella's side, the protector, the ally. It was salt in an already festering wound. Damien turned back to Isabella, his voice rising, desperate to claw back the control he felt slipping away. "You think standing here in a fancy dress makes you powerful? You're nothing without me. You were a nobody before I made you Mrs. Westwood." The crowd hissed audibly, disgust thick in the air. Even Serafina flinched, realizing how ugly his words sounded. Isabella, however, didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on him, steady, unshaken. "You're wrong," she said softly, her voice carrying more weight than his shouting. "I was never nothing. I only forgot my worth because I believed in you. But that mistake ends tonight." A murmur of approval swept through the room. People clapped quietly, some even nodding. Damien's jaw tightened until it looked like it might snap. His image, his power, his very identity was unraveling before him. The master of ceremonies, flustered but determined, tried to restore order. "Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we can." But Damien cut him off, his desperation boiling over. "No, you will all listen. You think she's some saint? You think she deserves your praise? She's nothing but a liar, a manipulator." "Enough." Ethan's voice sliced through Damien's rant like a blade. He stepped closer, his height towering over Damien's smaller frame. "If you have grievances, this is neither the time nor the place. Leave, now." The audience held its breath. Security guards moved subtly closer, ready to intervene. Damien's eyes darted around the room. He saw the stares, judging, mocking, dismissing him as a fool. This was the nightmare he had never imagined, to be the villain in the story he had once authored. For years he had controlled the narrative. Isabella was the weak wife, Serafina the glamorous prize, Damien the unstoppable mogul. But tonight, the script was ripped from his hands. Still, his pride refused to bow. "You'll regret this, Isabella," he spat, his voice low, his face twisted. "All of you will regret mocking me." Then, with a dramatic turn, he stormed out of the ballroom, Serafina scurrying after him, her golden dress catching on a chair as she nearly tripped in her haste. The doors slammed behind them, but the echo of his words lingered. Isabella remained standing, her breathing steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. She had expected tension, perhaps even confrontation, but not this level of venom. For a moment, doubt flickered in her mind. Damien had always been ruthless. What if he truly meant his threat? Ethan leaned toward her, his voice quiet but reassuring. "Don't let him rattle you. He thrives on fear. Tonight, you showed him you won't bend." She nodded, forcing a small smile, but inside, she felt the tremor of unease. Damien was humiliated, and a humiliated man was dangerous. The orchestra began to play again, the master of ceremonies announcing the next speaker, attempting to smooth the chaos. Guests returned to their seats, though the tension still hung heavy in the air. Isabella sat back down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across the ballroom, she caught sight of faces filled with admiration, sympathy, and respect. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as Damien's discarded wife, but as her own person. Yet the pit in her stomach reminded her that this was only round one. Because Damien wasn't finished. He had been shamed, yes, but his hunger for revenge would only grow. He had lost control in public, and that loss would drive him to reclaim it at any cost. And as Isabella glanced toward the doors where he had disappeared, she knew this battle was far from over. What she didn't know was that Damien had already begun plotting his next move, and this time, he wouldn't strike in public, but in the shadows. The night after the gala, the city buzzed with headlines. Every newspaper, every society blog, every gossip column carried the same story. Discarded wife becomes honored guest while millionaire Westwood denied entry. Photographs of Isabella in her midnight gown filled the front pages. She looked radiant, untouchable. By contrast, Damien's furious face, caught mid-yell, became a meme overnight. Social media swarmed with commentary. Talk about karma. She's glowing, he's fuming. That model looks like she wants to disappear. The tide of public opinion turned fast. For years, Damien had been praised as a self-made mogul, admired for his charm and ambition. But in the cold light of morning, he was the man who had tried to humiliate his ex-wife and failed spectacularly. Damien's penthouse, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage. He paced the marble floors. Serafina curled up on the couch, scrolling through the internet with tears in her eyes. "Damien," she whimpered, "they're calling me a gold digger. They're saying I ruined your marriage. This is humiliating." "Shut up," Damien snapped, his voice sharp with venom. "This isn't about you. It's about her. Isabella set me up." Serafina flinched. She didn't say a word. "You embarrassed yourself." Damien's eyes blazed. "She knew what she was doing. She wanted me to look like a fool. But this isn't over. If she thinks she can rise while I fall, she's mistaken. I'll destroy her." And he meant it. Within days, Damien's PR team launched a counterattack. Anonymous tips leaked to gossip sites, claiming Isabella had been unfaithful during their marriage. Old photographs of her with male colleagues were twisted into scandalous stories. One article even alleged she had only gained her honored guest position through Ethan Blackwell's influence, hinting at an affair. The whispers spread quickly. In high society, reputations rose and fell on rumor alone. "Maybe Isabella isn't so innocent," some muttered at luncheons. Perhaps Damien was justified in leaving her. Isabella felt the shift almost immediately. The morning she opened her email to find tabloids speculating about her relationship with Ethan, her stomach dropped. The woman who had just begun to rebuild her dignity was suddenly thrust back into the storm of judgment. At first, she tried to ignore it. She focused on her architectural projects, buried herself in charity work, and reminded herself that truth always prevailed. But the gossip grew louder. Paparazzi followed her to the grocery store, cameras flashing as they shouted, "Isabella, are you sleeping with Ethan Blackwell? Did you cheat on Damien?" Each headline chipped away at her spirit. Friends who had praised her at the gala now sent cautious texts. "Are you okay? Maybe lay low for a while." Invitations disappeared. Even her work partners grew hesitant, worried about being caught in a scandal. One night, alone in her apartment, Isabella collapsed onto her bed. The tears she had held back for weeks came pouring out. She buried her face in her pillow, her shoulders shaking with the weight of betrayal. She whispered into the darkness, "Why won't he let me go? Why does he need to keep destroying me?" The loneliness was suffocating. She thought of the years she had wasted on Damien, the love she had poured into a man who only ever saw her as disposable. Now, even in freedom, his shadow loomed, poisoning everything she touched. For a moment, the doubt returned. Maybe the world was right. Maybe she was weak. Maybe she was nothing without him. The whispers echoed in her mind, louder than truth, louder than reason. But then her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Don't let him win. Meet me tomorrow. I have something to show you." The next day, she found herself in Ethan's sleek Manhattan office. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, but Isabella felt too raw to admire it. Ethan studied her carefully, his sharp eyes softening. "You've been crying," he said gently. Isabella looked away. "Damien's poisoning everyone against me. He's spreading lies, and I don't know how much more I can take." Ethan leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Do you know why he's doing this? Because he's losing. He's desperate. A man like Damien can't accept humiliation, so he lashes out. But desperation always makes men reckless, and reckless men destroy themselves." Isabella shook her head. "It doesn't feel like he's destroying himself. It feels like he's destroying me." Ethan slid a folder across the desk. "Open it." Inside were documents, financial reports, legal filings, photographs. Damien's empire, Ethan explained, was crumbling. His last 3 real estate deals were disasters, propped up by borrowed money and falsified numbers. Investors were pulling out. Lawsuits loomed. "He's louder than ever because he's weaker than ever," Ethan said, "and I intend to make sure the world sees the truth." For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in Isabella's chest. If Damien's empire fell, his lies would fall with it. But hope came with fear. "Ethan, if you expose him, he'll come after us both. He's already furious with me." Ethan's gaze was steady. "Let him come. I've fought bigger men than Damien and won. But Isabella, you need to decide. Do you want to keep running from him, or do you want to stand and fight?" The question hung heavy in the air. Isabella thought of the years she had spent in Damien's shadow, thought of the humiliation he had inflicted, thought of the tears she had shed alone. And then she remembered the night of the gala, the applause, the way the world had looked at her not with pity but with respect. That taste of dignity burned brighter than her fear. She lifted her chin. "I want to fight." Ethan nodded, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Good. Then it's time to show Damien that you're not just his ex-wife. You're the woman who will bury him." The words filled her veins with fire. For the first time, Isabella felt not like a victim, but like a warrior sharpening her blade. Still, a chill ran down her spine as she left Ethan's office, because deep down she knew Damien wasn't done, and she was right. That very night, Damien placed a phone call to a journalist notorious for destroying reputations. His voice was cold, steady, dripping with venom. "Find me everything you can on Isabella Grant," he ordered. "Every secret, every mistake, every scar. I don't care how much it costs. I want her ruined." And the journalist's reply made Damien smile for the first time in weeks. "Oh, Mr. Westwood, I already have something that will finish her." The article hit the internet like wildfire. A full-page exposé, dripping with venom, splashed across the most notorious gossip blog in New York. The truth about Isabella Grant, manipulator, opportunist, mistress. The story painted Isabella not as the dignified philanthropist the world had seen at the gala, but as a woman who had supposedly clawed her way up through deception. Anonymous sources claimed she had seduced Ethan Blackwell to secure her honored guest position. Old photos of her laughing with male colleagues were presented as evidence of affairs. One line, bolded for emphasis, declared, "She never loved Damien, she used him, and when he replaced her, she turned to his enemies." Within hours, the story was everywhere. Talk shows debated her character, radio hosts mocked her, online trolls swarmed her social media with insults, gold digger, snake. She fooled everyone. Isabella sat in her apartment, the glow of her phone burning her eyes as comment after comment poured in. Her heart hammered. Every word felt like a stone thrown against her chest. How could people believe this? How could the world so easily forget what they had seen with their own eyes at the gala? Her hands shook as she shut her laptop, pressing her palms against her temples. She wanted to scream, but only silence filled the room. She curled into herself on the couch, memories flashing through her mind. Damien's cold words, Serafina's mocking smirk, the humiliation at dinners where she had been invisible. And now, even in her rebirth, he was finding ways to pull her back into the shadows. The tears came hot and unrelenting. She sobbed until her chest ached, until her throat was raw. For years she had been told she was nothing without Damien. She thought she had finally broken free of that lie. But now it seemed like the world believed it again. That night, Isabella barely slept. When she did, nightmares haunted her. Damien's voice jeered in the darkness. "You'll always be nothing, Bella. No dress, no diamonds, no billionaire can change that." She woke with a gasp, her pillow damp with tears. For 2 days she hid. She ignored calls, shut out friends, even avoided Ethan. Shame wrapped around her like chains, heavier than ever before. She considered leaving New York altogether. Maybe Damien was right. Maybe she wasn't strong enough to survive in this world. But then came the knock. It was late afternoon when the sound echoed through her apartment. Reluctantly, she opened the door, and there stood Ethan Blackwell. His expression a mix of concern and quiet fire. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, holding a folder in one hand and a sleek tablet in the other. "You've been avoiding me," he said. His tone wasn't accusing, just factual. Isabella looked away. "I can't fight him, Ethan. He'll never stop. Every time I rise, he finds a way to drag me down." Ethan set the folder on the coffee table, his gaze steady. "You're wrong. He's not dragging you down. He's digging his own grave. And I have proof." She blinked, her tear-swollen eyes narrowing. "Proof?" He tapped the tablet, pulling up a series of documents, financial reports, internal memos, even confidential emails. Damien paid for that article. He bought those lies, but more than that, His empire is collapsing. The debts, the falsified numbers, the investors fleeing, it's all here. He's drowning, Isabella. And when the world sees this, no rumor about you will matter. Her heart skipped. How did you get this? Ethan allowed himself a faint smile. Let's just say Damien underestimated how many of his so-called allies prefer me to him. They were more than willing to hand me the rope he's been hanging himself with. Isabella's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. Every page was a nail in Damien's coffin. Unpaid loans, lawsuits filed quietly under the radar, desperate emails begging investors not to pull out. The mighty mogul wasn't invincible. He was crumbling. And yet, fear clung to her. Even if this is true, what if he spins it? He always spins everything. What if he blames me again? Ethan leaned closer, his voice low but powerful. He can't spin bankruptcy. He can't spin fraud. The truth doesn't need you to fight for it. It just needs you to stand when it breaks. Something shifted inside her then. The despair that had smothered her began to crack. She wasn't the liar, the manipulator, the fraud. Damien was. He had spent years projecting his ugliness onto her. Now the world would see the truth. But the turning point didn't come from the documents. It came from Ethan's next words. "There's something else you need to know," he said, sliding a photograph from the folder. It was of Damien, his arm around Serafina, both of them laughing in front of a penthouse apartment. This apartment isn't his. It's Serafina's. She's not just a model. She's been working with one of Damien's competitors. She's feeding them his secrets. Isabella's breath caught. "What?" Ethan nodded. "The woman he left you for, the one he parades around, isn't loyal to him. She's been undermining him all along. Damien's biggest humiliation hasn't even hit him yet." For the first time in weeks, Isabella laughed. It wasn't cruel, but it was real, a release of the tension that had strangled her. Damien, the man who had thrown her away for a younger model, was about to be betrayed by that very woman. The irony was poetic. Her despair melted into something sharper. Determination. She straightened, wiping the remnants of tears from her face. "Then it's time the world sees the real Damien Westwood." Ethan studied her, a rare softness in his gaze. "That's the Isabella I know." Together they began to plan. They would leak the documents strategically, ensure the right journalists received them, and time the exposure with Damien's next big event. The truth would not just trickle out. It would explode, leaving no room for denial. But as Isabella prepared herself for the battle ahead, a chill lingered. Damien was cornered, and cornered men were dangerous. If he sensed betrayal, especially from Serafina, his wrath could become reckless, even violent. That night, Isabella sat by her window, staring at the city lights. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope. But deep down, she knew this fight was far from over. Because across town, Damien was on the phone again, his voice raw with rage. "You said you had something on her," he hissed to the journalist. "That wasn't enough. I want more. I want something that ends her completely." The journalist's reply was calm, almost amused. "Don't worry, Mr. Westwood. Tomorrow morning, the world will know a secret Isabella Grant never wanted anyone to see." And when Isabella woke the next day, the headlines staring back at her made her blood run cold. The morning sun filtered weakly through Isabella's curtains, but its warmth couldn't touch her. She sat at the edge of her bed, her phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. Dozens of notifications flooded in, texts, emails, calls. Her heart pounded as she reached for the device, dread already coiled in her chest. The headline burned across the screen in bold letters. Isabella Grant's hidden past exposed, the child she abandoned. Her breath caught. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She clicked the article, her eyes scanning the venomous words. The journalist had unearthed a truth Isabella had buried for years. Her younger sister, Maria. When Isabella was in her early 20s, Maria had struggled with addiction. Isabella had tried desperately to help, checking her into rehab programs, covering her debts, even hiding her from Damien when he complained about family baggage. But one night, Maria had vanished, leaving behind a trail of chaos. Damien had been merciless. "Your sister is dead weight," he had sneered. "You want to save her? Then you'll drown with her." Eventually, Maria disappeared from Isabella's life altogether. No one knew if she had survived. Isabella had carried the guilt silently, convinced she had failed her sister, ashamed of the chaos Maria brought into her pristine marriage. She had never spoken of it publicly, never admitted the depth of her heartbreak. And now Damien had twisted that painful chapter into a weapon. The article claimed Isabella had abandoned her sister to protect her social standing. It painted her as cold, heartless, willing to sacrifice family for image. Cold-blooded Isabella, one tabloid sneered. The charity queen who couldn't even save her own blood. Isabella's phone buzzed with cruel messages. How could you? Fraud. No wonder he left you. Her chest tightened until she couldn't breathe. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched her stomach, nausea twisting inside her. It wasn't just lies. It was her deepest wound exposed, raw and bleeding for the world to feast on. By midday, paparazzi were outside her building, shouting, "Isabella, did you abandon your sister? Is it true you never helped her?" Cameras flashed relentlessly as she slipped into a car, her face pale, her body trembling. Inside Ethan's office hours later, she collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking. "He's destroyed me this time," she whispered. "This isn't gossip about dresses or affairs. This is my family, my shame." Ethan's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Isabella, listen to me. He didn't destroy you. He exposed your pain. Yes, but pain doesn't destroy. It reveals strength. You tried to save your sister. You did everything you could. That's not abandonment. That's love." She shook her head violently. "People don't care about the truth. They care about the story. And the story right now is that I'm a monster." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. Finally, he said, "Then tell them your story, not his, yours." The thought terrified her. Standing in front of cameras, admitting her past, exposing her grief, it felt impossible. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she saw not pity, but conviction. The kind of conviction she once thought Damien had, but never truly did. That night, Isabella sat alone at her desk, staring at a blank page. Slowly, she began to write. She wrote about Maria, about the nights she sat by her sister's hospital bed, about the endless attempts to save her. She wrote about the helplessness, the despair, the guilt that had haunted her for years. And she wrote about love, the kind of love that doesn't disappear even when people do. The next morning, instead of hiding, Isabella stood before the press. Her hands shook as she stepped up to the podium, the cameras blinding, the microphones crowding her. For a heartbeat, she wanted to run. But then she remembered Ethan's words. "Don't let him define the story. Tell your own." Her voice cracked at first, but it grew steadier with every word. "Yes, I have a sister. Yes, she struggled. And yes, I tried to save her. I tried until it broke me, but I never abandoned her. I never stopped loving her. The truth is, addiction destroys families. It nearly destroyed mine. But that doesn't make me heartless. It makes me human." The room was silent. Journalists, used to denials and spin, were confronted instead with raw honesty. Some lowered their cameras. Others leaned closer, captivated. Isabella took a breath, her eyes glistening but unashamed. "I'm not perfect. I've been broken, humiliated, discarded. But I've also risen. And I will not apologize for surviving." Applause broke out, not from everyone but from enough. The sound wrapped around her like armor. By evening, the tide had begun to turn. Headlines shifted. Isabella Grant speaks with courage. From shame to strength, Isabella breaks her silence. Social media buzzed not with scorn, but with sympathy. Many shared their own stories of family struggles, of siblings lost to addiction. For the first time, Isabella wasn't just admired, she was relatable. Across the city, Damien raged. He had expected her to crumble, to disappear in disgrace. Instead, she had turned his weapon into her shield. At a private dinner, Serafina whispered to him, "Maybe this isn't working, Damien. Maybe you should stop." He slammed his glass onto the table, wine spilling like blood. "Stop? Never. She made me a laughingstock. I'll burn her world to the ground before I stop." But Damien didn't know what was coming, because that night, Ethan called Isabella with news that would change everything. "We found her," he said softly. Isabella's breath caught. "Found who?" Ethan's voice was steady. "Your sister. Maria. She's alive." And as Isabella gripped the phone, her tears of despair turned to tears of hope. Because the one secret Damien thought would ruin her might become the very thing that saves her. For a long moment, Isabella couldn't breathe. Ethan's words echoed in her ears like a bell tolling at dawn. "We found her. Your sister. Maria is alive." Her knees weakened, and she gripped the edge of her desk to steady herself. Tears welled in her eyes, not of despair this time, but of something deeper, something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Hope. Alive? She whispered, her voice breaking. After all this time? Ethan's tone softened. Yes, she's in a recovery center upstate. She's been clean for nearly a year. Isabella, she asked about you. Her heart swelled and shattered all at once. She had imagined Maria gone so many times that believing in her survival felt dangerous. But now, the possibility was real. The next day, Isabella traveled to the center. As she walked down the sterile white hallway, her heart raced. At the end of the corridor, in a sunlit room, Maria sat by a window, her dark hair tied back, her figure thinner but her eyes alive. When their gazes met, time seemed to stop. Maria's lips trembled into a smile. Bella? Isabella rushed forward, tears streaming, and wrapped her arms around her sister. They clung to each other, sobbing, words unnecessary. Years of guilt, pain, and longing dissolved in that embrace. I thought I lost you, Isabella whispered. Maria shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. No, Bella, you never lost me. I lost myself. But you never stopped loving me. I felt it, even when I was gone. The reunion became a turning point. For years, Isabella had carried shame like a chain, believing Damien's words that she had failed as a sister, as a woman. But now, seeing Maria alive and healing, she realized the truth. Love had never abandoned her. It had endured, even through darkness. Over the following weeks, Isabella visited Maria often. They talked for hours about childhood memories, about Maria's struggles, about the nights Isabella had stayed awake, wondering if her sister was even alive. Each conversation healed old wounds and strengthened new bonds. For the first time, Isabella felt whole, and that wholeness ignited transformation. She no longer moved like a woman trying to prove her worth. She moved like a woman who knew it. She began preparing not just to survive Damien's attacks, but to finish them once and for all. Ethan played a crucial role. One evening, in his private penthouse overlooking the city, he stood beside her as a stylist team unveiled sketches. Gowns of sharp elegance, suits tailored to perfection, jewelry that commanded attention without apology. You've always been beautiful, Isabella, Ethan said. But beauty isn't what wins wars. Presence does. And when you walk into the next gala, I want the room to know, Isabella Grant is untouchable. At first, Isabella hesitated. She wasn't used to demanding attention. For years, she had been told to stay quiet, stay small. But as she gazed at the gowns, the mirrors reflecting a woman reborn, she felt something powerful rising within her. She chose a gown unlike any she had worn before, a crimson silk creation with a plunging neckline and a train that swept like fire across the floor. Bold, daring, unapologetic. When she tried it on, she didn't recognize herself. Gone was the discarded wife. Standing in the mirror was a queen. Maria, visiting that day, clasped her hands together, tears sparkling in her eyes. You look like power, Bella, like everything Damien was afraid of. Isabella smiled, her heart steady. I'm not afraid anymore. The transformation extended beyond clothing. She began training with a public speaking coach, sharpening her voice to cut through noise. She studied Damien's financial records with Ethan, preparing to expose him with precision. Every detail mattered. Every move had to be calculated. Ethan watched her closely, often with admiration that lingered longer than words. One night, as they reviewed documents late into the evening, he said softly, You realize what you've become, don't you? You're not just fighting Damien anymore. You're rewriting your story. Isabella met his gaze, her voice steady. I'm not rewriting it. I'm taking it back. Meanwhile, Damien's empire was crumbling. His investors fled, his projects stalled, and whispers of fraud grew louder. But instead of retreating, Damien doubled down. He hosted extravagant parties, parading Serafina on his arm, trying desperately to mask his decline. To the untrained eye, he still glittered, but those who looked closer saw the cracks. And Isabella intended to tear those cracks wide open. The stage would be the annual Winter Gala, an event even grander than the first. Damien planned to use it as his redemption, a chance to prove he still belonged among the elite. What he didn't know was that Isabella and Ethan had orchestrated everything behind the scenes. The documents, the witnesses, the evidence. It would all culminate that night. As the date approached, Isabella prepared herself not just physically but emotionally. One evening, she returned to the recovery center with Maria. They sat by the window, snowflakes falling outside, silence wrapping around them like a blanket. Maria took Isabella's hand. "Bella, promise me something. Promise me that when you stand on that stage, you're not just fighting Damien. Promise me you're fighting for yourself, for us." Isabella squeezed her sister's hand, tears glistening. "I promise." The night of the gala arrived. Outside the venue, the city glowed with lights, limousines lining the street, paparazzi swarming like bees. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, tables draped in silver, and 1,000 eyes hungry for spectacle. Damien arrived first, Serafina glittering beside him, his smile wide but strained. He shook hands aggressively, laughed too loudly, and boasted of deals that no longer existed. Some applauded, others whispered, but Damien clung to the illusion of control. Then the room shifted. The announcer's voice rang out, "Please welcome our guest of honor, Isabella Grant." The doors opened and Isabella entered, draped in crimson fire, diamonds cascading at her throat. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed like lightning. She didn't walk, she commanded. Ethan followed at her side, not overshadowing her but reinforcing her strength, a silent wall of power. Across the room, Damien froze. His smile faltered, his grip on Serafina's arm tightening until she winced. The sight of Isabella, radiant, fearless, adored, was salt on his deepest wound. But Isabella didn't look at him. Not yet. She moved through the crowd like royalty, each step erasing the years of humiliation, each gaze confirming her rebirth. She was no longer the woman Damien had discarded. She was the woman the world now admired. And as she reached the center of the ballroom, the master of ceremonies raised a hand. Tonight, Isabella Grant will not only be celebrated for her philanthropy, but she has also requested to make an announcement. A hush fell. Damien's chest tightened, suspicion flashing in his eyes. Isabella stepped up to the microphone, her crimson gown catching the light, her voice steady as she looked over the sea of faces. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I reveal a truth that will change everything you think you know about Damien Westwood." The microphone hummed softly in Isabella's hands as the ballroom waited in hushed silence. The glow of chandeliers bathed her in light, making her crimson gown blaze like fire. Every camera in the room zoomed in, every whisper ceased. Across the hall, Damien watched with narrowed eyes, his jaw tight, his forced smile stretched thin. Isabella took a breath, her heart pounding, but her voice was steady when it rang out. "For years," she began, "I lived in the shadow of a man who told me I was nothing without him. A man who believed his wealth gave him the right to control, humiliate, and discard. Tonight, I stand before you not as his wife, not as his victim, but as a woman who finally found her voice." Gasps echoed across the ballroom, and Damien's face flushed. He leaned forward, muttering under his breath, "Don't you dare." But Isabella continued, her gaze never faltering. "You all saw what happened at the last gala. Damien Westwood tried to barge in and humiliate me. But what you didn't see was the desperation behind his anger. Damien Westwood is not the man he pretends to be. He is not the mogul he claims to be. Tonight, the truth comes out." She signaled with her hand. Screens around the ballroom flickered to life, projecting documents Ethan had helped her prepare. Financial reports, emails, contracts, all displayed in vivid detail. The audience leaned in, eyes wide, as Isabella narrated. "These are records of Damien's last 3 business ventures. Deals he boasted about, deals he claimed were successes. In reality, they were failures, propped up by borrowed money and lies. He falsified numbers, deceived investors, and lined his pockets while others lost everything." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A senator shivered uncomfortably. A socialite covered her mouth with her hand. Whispers darted like sparks. "Fraud? Is this true? Damien?" Damien shot to his feet, his voice booming. "Lies, all lies. She forged those documents." Isabella turned her gaze on him, calm and sharp as glass. "Really, Damien? Shall I play the recordings too?" The room stilled again. Another flick of her hand and the screens lit up with audio. Damien's voice filled the hall. Recordings of him cajoling investors, threatening partners, admitting to creative accounting. His arrogance, once hidden behind closed doors, now echoed in front of hundreds. Damien's face drained of color. He lunged toward the stage. "Turn that off. Do you know who I am?" Ethan stepped forward, blocking his path with quiet authority. "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "We know exactly who you are, and so does everyone else now." The crowd erupted, a storm of outrage and disbelief. Investors stood, demanding explanations. A woman shouted, "You stole from us." Another voice hissed, "You ruined families with your lies." Serafina clutched Damien's arm, panicked. "Damien, they're turning on you." He shoved her away roughly, his mask shattering. "Quiet, you useless." His words cut off as cameras flashed, catching the venom in his expression. Isabella stepped closer to the microphone, her voice rising above the chaos. "This is the man who once told me I was worthless. This is the man who left me, who tried to destroy me. But tonight, the truth is clear. Damien Westwood is not powerful. He is a fraud, and his empire, like his lies, is collapsing." The applause began slowly, then swelled like thunder. People stood, clapping, cheering, some chanting her name. "Isabella! Isabella!" For the first time in years, Isabella felt the weight of humiliation lift. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was triumphing. Damien, however, was unraveling. His face twisted with rage, his voice hoarse as he screamed over the applause. "You think this is over? You think you've won? I'll sue you for defamation. I'll bury you." But the room no longer listened to him. Security guards moved closer, murmurs of police investigations already spreading. Damien's allies melted away, their loyalty evaporating with his power. Even Serafina, tears streaking her mascara, backed away, shaking her head. "No, Damien," Isabella said, her voice steady and final. "It's you who is buried under your lies, your greed, and your arrogance." The cameras caught every word, every expression. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. Damien exposed, fraud revealed at Gala. Isabella grants stunning revenge. Damien stumbled, his chest heaving, his eyes wild, as if searching for an escape. The once untouchable millionaire now looked small, cornered, broken. Ethan placed a hand gently on Isabella's shoulder, grounding her, steadying her. She had done what no one thought possible. She had brought Damien to his knees in front of the very world he had once controlled. The orchestra struck up again, almost mockingly, as though reclaiming the gala's dignity. Guests returned to their seats, buzzing with shock and excitement. But Isabella knew it wasn't truly over. Not yet. Damien was like a wounded animal, dangerous in defeat. He wouldn't simply fade quietly into disgrace. As security escorted him toward the doors, Damien twisted his head, his eyes locking onto Isabella. His voice, hoarse but venomous, carried across the ballroom. "This isn't finished, Isabella. You may have won tonight, but you'll regret crossing me. I'll make sure of it." The guards pulled him away, but his threat lingered like smoke in the air. Isabella stood tall, refusing to flinch. She had taken his power, exposed his lies, reclaimed her dignity. Yet the echo of his words gnawed at her. Because she knew Damien. He would strike again. Not with wealth or charm this time, but with desperation. And desperate men were the most dangerous of all. As the gala continued, applause surrounding her, Isabella smiled for the cameras, but inside, her heart braced for the storm she knew was coming. And across the city that night, Damien sat alone in his penthouse, staring out at the skyline, whispering into the darkness, "If I can't have power, then no one will." The night of the gala ended in triumph, but the aftershocks carried into the following days. Headlines blared Damien's downfall. Investors pulled out completely. Lawsuits piled high. His empire, once glittering, was reduced to ashes overnight. But Damien wasn't finished. Humiliation twisted into obsession. Alone in his penthouse, he raged like a storm, smashing glasses, tearing papers, screaming at shadows. For the first time in his life, no one answered his calls. Allies vanished, friends deserted him, and even Serafina had walked out, her betrayal with his competitor revealed in the papers. His world was gone. But in his mind, only one person was to blame, Isabella. "If I burn," he muttered into the darkness, "she burns with me." 2 nights later, Isabella was leaving a charity board meeting when she felt it. Eyes watching her, the air heavy with danger. Her driver had stepped away, and in that split second of vulnerability, a black car pulled up. Damien emerged, his face gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, his suit wrinkled like he hadn't slept in days. "Isabella," he hissed, "get in the car." She froze. "You shouldn't be here, Damien. You've already lost. Go home." He laughed bitterly. "Home? I don't have a home. You took everything from me, you embarrassed me, you destroyed me, and now you're going to listen." Her pulse quickened, but she stood tall. "I didn't destroy you, Damien. You destroyed yourself." The words cut deep, and his face twisted. He lunged closer, grabbing her arm. For a terrifying moment, Isabella felt the old fear surge back, the fear of being trapped, controlled, diminished. But then Ethan's car pulled up beside them. The door flew open, and Ethan stepped out, his expression like stone. "Let her go, Damien." Damien sneered, but his grip loosened. "Ah, the White Knight, always swooping in. You think you've won, Blackwell? You think she'll save you? She'll betray you like she betrayed me." Ethan didn't flinch. "No, Damien, she didn't betray you. You betrayed yourself. And the difference between us is this. I stand with her, not against her." Damien's eyes darted between them, wild, searching, desperate. For years he had thrived on control, on bending others to his will. Now, faced with two people who would no longer bow, he looked small, broken. With one last snarl, he spat, "This isn't over." Then he stumbled back toward his car and disappeared into the night. But it was over. Days later, the court froze Damien's accounts. His fraud charges went public. He was forced to sell his penthouse to cover debts. The man who once walked with arrogance now walked under the shadow of disgrace. His name, once powerful, was now a cautionary tale. Isabella, on the other hand, rose higher than ever. Her speech at the gala went viral, not just as gossip, but as inspiration. Women across the country shared her words. "I will not apologize for surviving." Survivors of toxic marriages, of betrayal, of humiliation wrote to her, thanking her for speaking aloud what they couldn't. But the most healing moment came not from the public, but from Maria. Together, the sisters rebuilt their bond. Maria moved into a small apartment in the city, working part-time at a youth recovery center. Every time Isabella visited, they laughed, cried, and healed together. One snowy evening, as they sipped cocoa by Maria's window, Maria said softly, "You saved me, Bella. Not just back then, you saved me now. Watching you fight, it gave me strength." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "No, Maria, we saved each other." Meanwhile, Ethan remained a steady presence by her side. Their relationship, once rooted in alliance, grew into something deeper, mutual respect, admiration, and a quiet tenderness. They didn't rush it, they didn't need to. Strength like theirs wasn't built in haste. Months later, the city held another gala, this time not one of wealth and vanity, but of charity, raising funds for recovery programs like the one that had saved Maria. Isabella was the honored speaker once more. As she stepped onto the stage, dressed not in crimson fire but in elegant white, symbolizing renewal, the room erupted in applause. Ethan sat in the front row, Maria beside him, both smiling with pride. Isabella's voice carried with steady power. "Tonight, we celebrate not just survival but rebirth. We celebrate the truth that no woman, no man, no person is defined by the lies told about them. We are defined by our strength, our choices, our courage to rise after the fall." The audience stood, clapping, tears glistening in many eyes. For Isabella, this was the true victory. Not humiliating Damien, not even exposing his lies. The real triumph was reclaiming herself, building a life rooted in dignity, love, and truth. And Damien? He vanished into obscurity. Some whispered he fled the country. Others claimed he lived in exile under a false name. But it didn't matter. His story was no longer hers. His shadow no longer touched her light. As the gala ended, Isabella stepped down from the stage where Ethan extended his hand. She took it, her smile radiant, her heart steady. "Proud of you," he whispered. She squeezed his hand. "Proud of us." Together, they walked out into the snowy night, the city lights glowing above, the future stretched wide before them. Isabella glanced at Maria, at Ethan, at the people waiting outside cheering her name, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely free. She had been betrayed, humiliated, discarded, but she had risen, stronger, wiser, untouchable. And as cameras flashed one last time, she left the words that would echo far beyond the ballroom, words that women everywhere would carry in their hearts. A woman is never weak for being broken. She is powerful for rising again. All right, my friend, so that's how our story finally comes to an end. And if you're still here with me right now, it means something in Isabella's journey touched your heart in a special way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or maybe it showed you that no matter how dark the night feels, the morning always comes. The Stoics used to say, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Seneca. What truly matters is how we rise after the fall, how we choose dignity and courage over bitterness. Isabella's story is proof that betrayal and pain don't have to define us, they can refine us. So my dear friends, if this story spoke to you, Give it a like, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Together, let's keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us all. A broken past can be the beginning of a stronger future.